PG resident in the Department of Vascular Surgery at MMC Chennai. I would like to start off by expressing my gratitude to Dr. Tapi sir for creating this wonderful platform for learning. And due to his efforts, we had a rich source of material even during the COVID times. And thank you, sir. I'd also like to thank Dr. Vella madam, surgery, for guiding me in preparing for this presentation. I'll be presenting on the topic ruptured aortoiliac aneurysms and their management. We all know that ruptured aortic aneurysm is an acute vascular emergency, and over the years, it continues to remain as a lethal condition. This is in spite of many advances in the perioperative management and also increased number of elective procedures being performed for abdominal aortic aneurysms. We know that overall mortality varies from 74 to 90%. And classically, it has been thought that 50% of the patients die before reaching the hospital, and 50% of those who reach the hospital die before any intervention can be performed. And we also know that the open repair for ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm has 5 to 10 times more mortality compared to an elective repair. Coming to the definitions, ruptured aortic aneurysm is one which has extraluminal blood on CT or where the blood is noted at the time of surgery. It can be a contained rupture where blood is noted outside the sac confined to the retroperitoneum, or it can be a free rupture where blood enters the peritoneal cavity. This has to be differentiated against a symptomatic aortic aneurysm where the patient presents with pain but not hypotension. The pain may be due to acute expansion of the sac, due to intramural hemorrhage, or due to hemorrhage into the thrombus. This represents a impending rupture, and this also needs urgent surgery. But the mortality associated with this condition is lower than that expected for a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The inclusion of symptomatic cases as rupture cases artificially reduces the mortality in studies. So this is important. Coming to epidemiology, historically, the true incidence of ruptured aortic aneurysm has been difficult to quantify because many patients were diagnosed only on the basis of clinical findings, and many other patients died even before reaching the hospital. And from population studies, we can learn that the incidence has steadily increased from 1970s to 2000, and there's a definite reduction noted up from 2010 onwards. The mortality is only slightly reduced when compared to the incidence. And the reduce in incidence of ruptured aortic aneurysm is being attributed to performing more cases of elective EVAR, even in high-risk patients, and due to screening programs, and due to reduced smoking and improved control of serious risk factors among the patients. Coming to the overall mortality of ruptured aortic aneurysm repair, from 1990s to 2010, we can observe that the mortality has only slightly reduced from 51% to 42% after the repair. And the number of people who are offered intervention has gone up. More than 80% of the patients have been operated in USA, and 58% of the patients have been operated in USA, in UK. And when we compare this to the intervention rate in the previous decade, we can see that only 48% of the patients were offered any intervention in the previous decade. So more number of patients are being operated. And also ruptured aneurysms with suitable anatomy for EVAR have the lowest mortality and the complication rates. Coming to pathophysiology of the rupture, ruptured aortic aneurysm represents a failure of the aortic wall to bear the load of the blood pressure. Normally, the aortic wall can sustain tension up to 120 newtons per centimeter square, whereas an aneurysmal wall ruptures at 65 newtons per centimeter square. Traditionally, this has been explained by the Laplace law, where the wall tension is proportional to the radius times the pressure. So the more the radius of the aneurysm, the more the risk of the rupture. But this has a limitation such that it is ideal only for cylindrical or circular shape, and this does not take into account for complex geometry of the abdominal aortic aneurysms. It also doesn't take into account for the material anisotropy, where the elastic property and the thickness of the aneurysm wall differs. So they have come up with this technique called finite element analysis. This is a computational model which is reconstructed from the aortic scan, which shows wall stress for each segment of aortic wall and the mean wall stress. This not only helps in predicting the risk of rupture, but also predicts the area of rupture. This picture we can see finite element analysis being applied to a CT angio of a patient with abdominal aortic aneurysm, and we can note that in the location which is on the left lateral side, the peak wall stress is at maximum, and this represents the highest risk of rupture. And when the patient was followed up, he developed rupture in the same region after 154 days. Coming to the role of aortic thrombus, a few studies have shown that intramural thrombus, in presence of the intramural thrombus, both peak wall stress and the mean wall stress are reduced. But a few other studies have also shown that presence of aortic thrombus causes localized hypoxia, reduces the nutrition, and increases vascular smooth muscle cell apoptosis, elastin degradation, and increased metalloproteinase activity. And also proteolytic enzyme activity on the surface of the thrombus can lead to fissure formation. So to conclude, we can infer that the presence of aortic thrombus is not protective against rupture, but on the contrary, it increases the risk of rupture because it accelerates the process of wall degeneration. Coming to the clinical features, the patient might present with a sudden history of onset of pain in the lower abdomen. The pain is usually severe, it is unrelenting. It is usually referred to the back or even the flanks or groin, and it might be even referred to the hip if psoas muscle irritation is present. Patient might also present with the history of syncope, and usually around 10 to 20% of the patients will be a known patient of abdominal aortic aneurysm. And on examination, patient is usually pale, diaphoretic, hypotensive with a tender abdominal mass, and flank ecchymosis may be noted as a late sign. The classical triad of abdominal pain, hypotension, and pulsatile abdominal mass is noted only in 1/3 of the patients. Rare presentations, patient can be presented with chest pain with tachycardia, and sometimes these kind of patients are confused to have a acute coronary syndrome, and the diagnosis of a ruptured aortic aneurysm might be altogether missed. And other rare presentation include acute gastrointestinal bleeding in presence of a aortoenteric fistula. Patient might also present with a new onset congestive cardiac failure, which is refractory to medical treatment. Also present with lower abdominal bruit thrill and with elevated JVP in presence of a aortocaval fistula. Coming to diagnostic evaluation, plain radiographs might be taken for evaluation for other conditions of acute abdomen, and these offer a clue for diagnosis. And in plain radiographs, we might note enlargement of calcified aortic wall beyond the normal limits. And in one of the areas, the rim of calcification may be lost. And this represents the area of rupture. Usually, loss of psoas shadow is also noted on the side of rupture. And ultrasound, it is operator dependent, it is rapid, and it is easily available. It has high specificity and sensitivity for detecting a abdominal aortic aneurysm, but it is not sufficiently accurate enough to exclude a rupture. Coming to the role of CT scans, this is the most accurate method. In a non-contrast CT, we can see for break in the line of calcification and presence of a retroperitoneal hematoma. A fine cut low volume contrast CT is ideal. And in this contrast CT, we can assess the relation of renal vessels, assess for neck length and diameter, angulation, and the iliac vessel status, and decide if the patient is suitable to undergo EVAR. We can also look for additional things like status of mesenteric vessels, status of renal vessels, presence of venous abnormalities, presence of perianeurysmal inflammation, and presence of horseshoe kidneys, which might have to change the management a little. And we can also look for conditions of other abdominal viscera, and any other pathologies can also be noted. Coming to the initial management strategies, patient triage and transfer to appropriate institution. This is a controversial statement. This has been made on the basis of US national inpatient data, where they noted that patients who had gone to rural centers had higher rates of no intervention being offered, and high volume centers have significantly lower mortality. Based on this, few authors have suggested that patients who are, after triage, patients who are stable might be shifted from rural center to high volume center in view of better outcomes, but no practical guidelines have been issued. The second strategy is use of permissive hypotension. This is also known by the names of hypotensive hemostasis or restricted fluid resuscitation. The concept origin is from trauma protocols, where they noted that patients in hemorrhagic shock with permittive hypotension had improved survival. Infusion of large volumes of IV fluids to raise the BP can cause further hemorrhage by overcoming the tamponade effect. It can also cause hemodilution, coagulopathy, hypothermia, and acidosis. Here, the goal is not to maintain the BP to normal levels, but to maintain enough BP to maintain the consciousness, minimize organ ischemia, and prevent ST depression. So, SBP is maintained around 70 to 80 mmHg. The other strategy is a protocol based approach. This is the ideal approach where 24 bar 7 hybrid OT, nurses, technicians, and equipment necessary for EVAR are all available round the clock. And this allows for quick and effective decision making in various scenarios to achieve the best possible results. This is also useful in educating the generalist and the emergency physicians for early diagnosis and management. One such example is the Albany Vascular Group Standardized Protocol. This is the protocol. When the patient comes to the ER, the on-duty vascular surgery team is alerted, and a hemodynamically unstable patient who are unconscious or who have no measurable BP are directed to the operating room. And patients who are stable enough, they are taken for emergency CT angio in the emergency department. Once the patient is shifted to the operating room, if the patient is hemodynamically unstable, under local anesthesia, under percutaneous approach, aortic balloon is placed and the patient is resuscitated. If the patient is hemodynamically stable, the operator has a preference for either general or local anesthesia, or he also has an approach for percutaneous or a femoral cut down. Once the patient has been resuscitated, iotogram is done, and the anatomy of aortoiliac vessels is assessed. If the patient has a favorable neck, he can be taken for EVAR. If the patient has an unfavorable neck, he can be taken for open surgical repair. Assessing the anatomical suitability for EVAR is done by a CT angio taken preoperatively. In case of unstable patients, they can be shifted to a hybrid OT and iotogram can be taken. Only around 46 to 64% of the patients have an anatomy which is suitable for endovascular repair. So, majority of the patients might not come through for a endovascular repair. So, open surgical repair still has a major role to play. In the IMPROVE trial, which is a landmark trial, they noted that shorter neck length has higher mortality in both open surgical repair and EVAR repairs. And for every 15 mm increase in the length, the mortality was dropped by 20%. Coming to the operative preparation and setup, patient should be accompanied by a doctor ideally when he undergoes a CT angiogram. Multiple studies have debated on the timing of the CT angiogram, and few studies have shown that only in 20% of the patient a CT angio could not be taken, and the patient was directly shifted to the operation theater. And a few other studies have noted that in patients in whom no operative intervention was done, the time of death after admission was usually around 17 hours. So most of the authors have suggested that in most of the cases, CT angiogram can be taken preoperatively. When the patient is unstable, at least ultrasound screening in ER can be attempted. And patient is shifted to the OT as quickly as possible. And there should be a coordinated, rapid, and simultaneous action from anesthetists, nurses, and technicians to secure a large bore access, arterial line. Nasogastric tube needs to be inserted, and folic catheterization needs to be done. And the patient is positioned on a warm surface. A cell saver is kept ready, and adequate blood and blood products are arranged. And induction of anesthesia is done only when all the members of the operative team have arrived. This is because of the fact that after the induction of anesthesia, the sympathetic tone is lost and the patient goes into profound hypotension. And coming to the operative strategies, the first strategy is the endovascular repair. This is preferred therapy for patients who have a suitable anatomy. Here, the advantages of EVAR include it being less invasive. It has reduced bleeding and it causes reduced damage to other structures. It minimizes hypothermia and it has less requirement for deep anesthesia. And overall mortality is low compared to open surgical repair. So much so that by 2012, more than 70% of ruptured aneurysm patients who are they underwent EVAR in the USA. Coming to arterial access and aortic balloon occlusion, this is done via a percutaneous access, and in some cases, a femoral artery contour may be necessary. Ultrasound guidance and micropuncture techniques are useful adjuncts, especially in presence of hypotension, where the pulse cannot be confidently palpated. And a large sheath is used, that is 12 to 16 French, 45 centimeters long. This is placed above the renal vessels, and in hemodynamically unstable patient, a compliant balloon is either partially or fully inflated at the level of supraciliac aorta. In picture A, we can see a compliant balloon being inflated at the level of suprarenal aorta. The balloon has been introduced from the left femoral approach. Stent graft main body has been introduced from the right femoral approach, and an aortogram has been taken from the sheet supporting the balloon. We can see the ruptured aortic aneurysms. We can also see the renal vessels. In panel B, we can see that the balloon has been deflated to avoid tangling with the mesh and to avoid tangling with the stent graft. And the stent graft main body has been deployed. And in panel C, we can see that the compliant balloon has been reintroduced from the right femoral approach and it's been inflated again. And in panel D, we can see that the contralateral gate of the stent graft has been cannulated and extension graft has been placed. And in panel E, we can see that the completion angiogram with exclusion of the aneurysm. Coming to the choice of anesthesia, this is again controversial. Few groups have advocated use of local anesthesia supplemented with conscious sedation just to maintain the sympathetic tone, whereas few others advocate general anesthesia to reduce the movement artifacts and also to increase the precision of deployment of the stent graft. A few others have advocated starting the procedures with local anesthesia, then converting it into general anesthesia for after exclusion. This is for removing the femur. This is for repairing the femoral arteries after the sheath removal. In the improved trial, local anesthesia greatly reduced the 30-day mortality as compared to general anesthesia. Coming to the use of bifurcated grafts versus aortounifem stent grafts. This is primarily based on the patient's aortoinguinal anatomy, and aortounifem graft is preferred where there is inability to access the contralateral gate or there's a significant occlusive disease or tortuosity in one of the iliac vessels. At least one iliac artery needs to be perfused to maintain the pelvic perfusion, and similar outcomes have been noted with both types of grafts. Conversion to open surgical technique may be required in three possible scenarios. In first scenario is when the patient has an unsuitable anatomy for undergoing EVAR. The second scenario is where all the equipment necessary for EVAR is not available. And the third scenario is when there is a failure to seal the ruptured aortic aneurysm after performing the EVAR procedure. Here, the aortic occlusion balloon can be maintained in position while laparotomy is performed. In presence of leaks, in type 1A leak, Suprarenal part of the stent can be left in situ to avoid aortic tear. And in type 1B leak, interposition graft can be sewn between the artery and the endograft. Coming to the other strategy, that is open surgical repair. Open surgical repair can be directly preferred in patients who have unsuitable anatomy for undergoing EVAR, and in second scenario where the institution doesn't have facilities for EVAR 24/7, and it can be done via transperitoneal approach or retroperitoneal approach. The transperitoneal approach has many advantages. Firstly, it is familiar to all surgeons. Secondly, there is no need for any complex positioning of the patient, and it allows for safe, rapid, effective proximal aortic control at any level, that is supraceliac, suprarenal, and infrarenal aorta, and distal control of iliac or even the femoral vessels can be taken. Supraceliac control is beneficial because we can take rapid control by blind technique even in an unstable patient, and this avoids possible injury to renal and mesenteric vessels because blind dissection is avoided in the region of renal and mesenteric vessels. This is a technique to obtain supraceliac aortic control. Using a finger, a rent is made in the lesser omentum, and this exposes the posterior peritoneum. And the diaphragmatic muscle fibers are again separated using the finger, and there's a potential space created between the periadventitia and the muscle fibers. And this is done on both the sides of the aorta. And after this, two fingers are introduced in the potential spaces created, and they are pulled on caudally. And using the fingers as the guide, aortic clamp can be applied. For aortic aneurysms with clear evidence of suprarenal extension, a thoraco-abdominal incision with the medial visual rotation may be necessary. Retroperitoneal approach can also be used to perform this repair. This is particularly useful in patients who are obese or patients who have hostile abdominal situations where the patient has undergone multiple laparotomies previously. This is also preferable in presence of a inflammatory aneurysm or in presence of a horseshoe kidney. It also has some disadvantages. First is the inability to examine the abdominal viscera. The second one being difficulty in exposing the right iliacs. And the third one is in presence of left-sided IVC or a retroaortic renal vein. The application of aortic clamp may be difficult and we might end up injuring the abdominal veins. Coming to the operative technique, initially proximal control is taken at supraceliac aorta. After this, patient is resuscitated by transfusing enough blood and blood products. Again, a controversial statement regarding the use of heparin. Few authors suggest administration of full dose of heparin, where few other authors suggest half dose heparin should be used. After this, anterior wall of abdominal aorta is exposed and IMA and iliac control is taken. After this, the sac is incised and open and the contents of the sac are evacuated. Then a finger is placed within the sac to identify the aortic neck, and careful dissection is carried out around the infrarenal aorta, and the aortic clamp can be shifted from suprarenal to infrarenal location. If iliac control is not taken, then the iliacs can be identified from within the sac, and balloon iliac occlusion can be done. At this point, suture ligation of all bleeding lumbar vessels is done, and IMA can be ligated or can be reimplanted. I'll be talking more about the IMA later. After this, aortic repair with a tube graft or a bifurcated graft as required is performed. At least one of the internal iliac artery perfusion should be maintained to reduce chances of pelvic and colon ischemia. Coming to anatomical abnormalities, venous anatomical abnormalities such as retroaortic renal vein, circumaortic renal vein, left-sided vena cava, or a duplicated IVC can be noted in a few other patients. Ideally, these have to be identified on CT angio before the procedure is started so that they can be effectively tackled. If they are encountered on the table, Meticulous dissection has to be done to avoid possible injury because when injured, they cause uh, profuse hemorrhage. If aortic clamp cannot be safely applied because of presence of these veins, it might be prudent to clamp and cut these veins and repair them after the aortic aneurysm repair has been completed. In presence of a horseshoe kidney, the graft might be there's a need to tunnel the graft posterior to the kidneys. And in presence of renal arteries which arise from the aneurysm, they might be reimplanted with the graft using the Carrel's patch technique. Coming to aorta caval fistula management, aorta caval fistula is suspected when there is continuous venous bleeding, even after ligating all the lumbar vessels. Direct digital pressure or use of sponge stick above and below the fistula is recommended to obtain hemostasis. The repair is done by suturing the fistula from within the aneurysm sac, and care is taken to avoid air and aortic debris from embolizing into the IVC during the repair. Coming to the abdominal closure, in 25 to 30% of the patients, the abdomen cannot be closed primarily because of swollen bowel, tissue edema, and retroperitoneal hematoma. Early mesh closure and vacuum-assisted closure system have to be used at this point. Use of minimal dissection, use of a cell saver, prevention of hypothermia intraoperatively. They're all adjuncts which are known to reduce the perioperative mortality. Coming to complications of ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm repair, they can be classified as local complications and systemic complications. Colonic ischemia is one of the important local complications. This is potentially lethal, and mortality ranges from 50 to 90% depending on the severity. It has an incidence of around 38% after open surgical repair and 23% after EVAR. It can be divided into three grades. Grade 1 is patchy mucosal necrosis. Grade 2 is mucosal and muscularis involvement. Grade 3 is transmural necrosis, gangrene, and perforation. The cause for this may be ligation of a patent inferior mesenteric artery in presence of inadequate collateral circulation, or it might be due to improper ligation of inferior mesenteric artery too far away, which interferes with the collateral circulation. Presence of bloody diarrhea is one of the earliest manifestations, and this is also an indication to perform colonoscopy. Some authors suggest routine flexible sigmoidoscopy on postoperative day 1 to look for colonic ischemia. And to prevent this, intraoperative assessment by Doppler or inferior mesenteric artery back pressure measurements can be done. And SVS guidelines recommend reimplantation of IMA in case of poor IMA back bleeding, occlusive lesions of celiac and superior mesenteric arteries, presence of a large meandering mesenteric artery, which can be noted on a CT angiogram done preoperatively, and when there is a failure to restore hypogastric perfusion, or when there is a previous rectosigmoid colectomy done, which would have destroyed the collateral pathways. In early less severe degrees, it can be managed conservatively, and when there are findings indicative of bowel gangrene, peritonitis, prompt re-exploration is needed, and resection of all compromised bowel and the creation of appropriate stomas may be necessary. And at this point, the aortic anastomosis and the graft should be protected from infection as much as possible. Abdominal compartment syndrome is another important local complication. This is pathological elevation of abdominal pressures more than 20 mmHg associated with organ dysfunction. This is again due to loss of domain in the abdominal cavity. And this can also happen after EVAR, and it is not exclusive to open surgical repair. And risk factors such as aortic occlusion balloon, massive transfusions, coagulopathy, and hemodynamic instability are associated with abdominal compartment syndrome after EVAR. And this is manifested as massive abdominal distension, oliguria, and difficulty in maintaining adequate ventilation. For grade 3 and grade 4, that is pressures more than 20 mmHg, decompressive laparotomy has to be done. Coming to spinal cord ischemia, this is one of the rarer complications, and the risk factors include interruption of pelvic blood supply, prolonged aortic cross clamping, preoperative and intraoperative hypotension, and embolization. Early recognition with CSF drainage, high dose steroids, and pelvic revascularization are the mainstays of therapy. Coming to ischemia of lower extremities, this can be caused by embolization of dislodged mural thrombus or atherosclerotic plaque from the aneurysm itself, or thrombosis of downstream vessel due to distal stasis, or creation of an intimal flag. It can we can also see microembolization or thrashwood in the lower limbs. Coming to systemic complications, cardiac complications are the most frequent cause of death in the postoperative period. Myocardial infarction might be seen in 15 to 20% of the patient, and which has a high mortality of around 17 to 66% in various studies. Respiratory failure is less significant with EVAR, and administration of large volumes of fluid and blood products, along with long cross-clamping times and pre-existing COPD, are all risk factors for developing respiratory failure. Coming to renal dysfunction, this is again predictive of mortality, and incidence varies from 26 to 45%, and the incidence is lower with EVAR. Suprarenal cross-clamping, long duration of cross-clamping, pre-existing renal insufficiency, shock, and increased age are all risk factors for developing renal dysfunction. Multi-organ failure is also noted in the postoperative period. Two-hit hypothesis, that is, reduced systemic organ perfusion due to hemorrhagic shock, which is followed by the second hit, that is ischemia secondary to temporary aortic clamping. Has a synergistic effect on the perfusion of the organ system, and this leads to multi-organ failure. And this is also predictive of mortality. And this is more commonly seen in open surgical repair than after EVAR. Coming to discussion about the outcomes of ruptured aortic aneurysm repairs, we have data which is coming from single center series, which are data coming from national registries, data from randomized trials, and meta-analysis of these randomized trials. The first set of data is from observational studies, such as US National Discharge Database, the Nationwide Inpatient Sample Survey, and the US Medicare Database. All of these demonstrate a significant 30-day mortality benefit of EVAR over open repair. But this is suspected to be because of selection bias. Patient who have favorable hemodynamic characteristics, who have favorable anatomical features, they would have been taken for EVAR. And the patient who have unfavorable hemodynamic features, they would have been taken for open repair. So this might be due to a selection bias. Also, we can note that cardiorespiratory and renal complications are lower in the EVAR group. Surgical complications are also lower in the EVAR group, and length of stay and discharge to home is also in favor of EVAR. EVAR group did have high rates of open surgical and endovascular reinterventions. Almost 25% of the patients required a reintervention at 3 months. Comparing the UK statistics from the US statistics, there was findings which noted that patients undergoing any type of repair was 58% in UK, and this was compared to United States, where 80% of the patients were offered some kind of intervention. Open surgical repair was higher in United Kingdom. 91% of the patients underwent open repair, whereas 79.1% of the patients underwent open repair in the United States. And in the United States, open repair mortality rates were significantly lower, whereas EVAR mortality rates were significantly better in United States. So after adjustment for other factors, predictors of mortality were weekend admissions and treatment outside a teaching hospital in both the countries. This has led to few people suggesting that a triage has to be done and the patient has to be transferred to a higher volume center for further management. Coming to randomized trials, there are three published randomized trials, each with a different randomization strategy, criteria, and outcome measure. The first one is AJAX, also called as Amsterdam Acute Aneurysm Trial. Here, the patients were randomized after a CT scan, which confirmed the rupture, and also the patient anatomy was suitable for either of the therapy. The second trial is the ECAR trial. This is a French trial. They randomized patients after doing a CT scan, which confirmed the rupture and also confirmed the eligibility of the patient to undergo either of the therapy. And they also confirmed that the patient was stable hemodynamically and the patient had a systolic PP of more than 80 mmHg. And IMPROVE is a landmark trial which had a large number of patients. This randomized the patients with only a clinical diagnosis of ruptured aortic aneurysm even before a CT scan was taken. So a large number of patients with symptomatic aortic aneurysms were also included in the trial, and the patients who were categorized under EVAR group, they had to undergo open surgical repair whenever they had anatomy which was unsuitable for EVAR. And this study is also advantageous because it also involved a large number of female patients. These are the results of all the three trials. Here we can see that 116 patients were randomized in AJAX trial, and in ECAR trial, 107 patients were randomized. And in IMPROVE trial, we can see that 613 patients were randomized. And a 30-day mortality, we can see a slight benefit of EVAR over operative repair in both AJAX and ECAR trial. But in IMPROVE trial, the mortality rate is almost similar. At 3 years, we can see EVAR is clearly beneficial over operative repair. EVAR has a mortality of 42% compared to open surgical repair, where the mortality is 54%. This is in the IMPROVE trial. Coming to meta-analysis of randomized trials, a Cochrane systemic review showed no difference in mortality between EVAR and operative surgical group. This involved two major RCTs and one pilot trial. Other meta-analysis, which included two randomized control trials and 39 observational studies, this revealed a statistically significant early mortality benefit in favor of EVAR when compared to open surgical repair. We can also see that there are few indices such as the Harman index and Glasgow aneurysm score, which are preoperative scoring systems. They can be employed to assess the risk of mortality preoperatively. They employ criteria such as age, increased serum creatinine, low HP, presence of myocardial infarction, loss of consciousness after admission, such factors to come up with a predictive score. But none of them have such kind of accuracy that they have a role in the clinical management of the patient. We can also assess the estimation of survival post-operatively based on various statistical models. Such statistical models employ parameters like increased creatinine level, the clamp site, and the intraoperative urine output to estimate the chances of survival. Coming to 5-year survival data, they are similarly remarkably similar for those who are alive for more than 30 days post-operatively, including patients who have undergone elective repair. Coming to quality of life and cost utility, this data is from AJAX and IMPROVE trials. We can note that initial cost is high for EVAR, but at the end we can note that the EVAR provides maximum QALYs, and the cost utility is also in favor of EVAR. To conclude, ruptured aortic aneurysm is a vascular emergency and it has a high mortality rate of around 80%. Patient selection and optimizing the perioperative care, such as permissive hypotension, use of cell saver, use of hypothermia prevention, has allowed open repair to demonstrate improved outcomes. And over recent years, EVAR has become the first choice technique in management of ruptured aortic aneurysms, where it has been shown to reduce early complications and mortality. But only 46 to 64% of patients have suitable anatomy for it. And there is significant confliction within the evidence base between the observational studies and the randomized control studies. And at present, there is no conclusive body of evidence to support the claim that EVAR is superior to operative repair in management of ruptured aortic aneurysm. At this point, a protocol-based approach may be ideal. These are the references. Thank you.